Hello and welcome to the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Martijn.
And I'm Andy.
And tonight we're going to be taking a trip into reality and what is real. We'll be discussing concepts like causal efficacy, and we'll be discussing if things like axioms and concepts themselves can even be considered real in and of themselves. So hopefully this conversation is something that you're going to be very interested in. Do you ever have any questions about what really is real? How can you trust your thoughts or anything like that? This stream might help you out, or it might confuse you even further, as is often the case with philosophy. To start with, I think we should probably define things, maybe. Let's not go into too much detail, but I mean, we could say sort of things like reality is what is. But Dave, how could we be a little bit more verbose than that?
I'm not really sure. Reality is everything that doesn't exist in the imagination.
Okay, so there we've got a clear split between something that is only in the imagination, perhaps, and something that is outside of it. And then when someone talks about what is real, what do they mean?
Generally, most people speak about things being real when they talk about it having some kind of objective existence, some existence beyond the mind. So if you were to suddenly remove all the minds from the universe, everything that remains is what's real. Another way to describe it is things that have causal efficacy and can be, can interact with things with causal efficacy are what is real, or the physical is what is real.
And when we get into something like causal efficacy, what does that actually mean?
It means it has the power to cause something else. So it has the power to interact with something and cause that thing to do something.
So if I was to say something incredibly irritating and you then got annoyed and you threw your degrees at the computer, would what I say have causal efficacy?
No.
No? Okay, so what is it then?
It has to be a direct cause. Your words can trigger a reaction within me. But that's not causal efficacy because your words aren't causing the action. Your words are things that I hear, which then interact with my brain, and my brain goes through the synapses and, the sort of neurochemicals, and it's those that have the causal efficacy, not your words.
And
your
similarly,
words,
you actually throwing the degrees, that's you having some causal efficacy there because you're...
That's the degrees hitting the computer would have causal efficacy.
Yeah?
Yeah. There's different kinds of causes, you see. There's like efficient causes, direct causes, immediate causes. An efficient cause would be something like a carpenter building like a bench, but that's not causal efficacy as such. A nail being hit by a hammer is causal efficacy.
And is that the sort of the action as the nail itself being hit by a hammer has
it's the interaction of the atoms?
Yeah, which then splits the wood, perhaps. It's got causal efficacy to do that. I mean, it could go straight in, but that's all different types of actual causal efficacy.
Yeah.
So drawing the plans and someone going, oh, yes, I want to build that bench, house, whatever, that's no real causal efficacy. That might interact with things that start something in motion, but that's not any real efficacy in itself.
Different kind of causes.
Martijn or Andy, do you have anything that you'd sort of like to add to that or question Dave on?
Not really.
No, I don't think so.
So would we say then, for something to be real in this sense, it has to have causal efficacy?
Yeah.
So numbers, then, they don't really have any...
There's a whole debate about whether numbers are real, because do numbers have objective existence? Because when we think about them doesn't make any difference. We can't imagine them into existence. We can't imagine 1 is 4, so to speak. We can't change the way 1 and 1 is 2. So there's a whole debate over whether they are real. So you would have something like mathematical Platonism, for an example.
Yeah, I suppose with that, just to clarify on something you said there, is that someone might be able to say, well, I can imagine 1 + 1 = 4, but that would be them changing the reference underneath. The underlying logic, if you will.
It would be the numerals that they would be speaking of,
exactly.
not the numbers.
And the numerals and everything like that is us giving a particular language to it, is it not? It's us saying that there's still something there that it's referring to, like a single unit, but again, a single unit is still us giving language to try and define this concept. Oh, I can't hear you, Dave. Don't know what's happened. You've muted yourself.
Yeah, the numerals refer to a number. It's not so much a unit, it's a number. There's an actual thing called a number. But whether they're real or not is up for debate. It depends on how you want to look at it.
But do they have any causal efficacy in themselves?
No, but they're said to have an objective existence, in that they aren't the product of an imagination.
Could we say the same about the
exist.
rules of logic as well, then?
No, not necessarily, because logic is something that's... The rules of logic, you can discard the law of non-contradiction, say, for something like dialecticism.
Yeah, there can be contexts where the rules don't necessarily apply.
Yeah, so they're within a framework.
But then something like the law of identity, could that ever be thrown away? Something is itself?
Well, no, because that's not, but it's not something that has an existence in the same sense that the number 1 would.
Okay. So you'd say that numbers are one of the few things that are grounded in such a way that they're both not real and real in that sense. They have no causal efficacy, but there is a big debate as to whether they're real in and of
They're
themselves.
real or not. Yeah, it depends on the stance that you take.
Is there anything else that's like that is sort of... Obviously you've stated why you think logic itself doesn't hold up to numbers in the same way. Is there anything that fits the paradigm of numbers having that realness without causal efficacy?
I'm not sure. Nothing springs to mind.
Is there anything either of you have to ask at this stage?
Not for me, no.
No? Okay. So largely speaking, we're thinking of, when we're talking about something that is real, it's something that it's something that is outside of the imagination, and apart from numbers, it's something that has causal efficacy. Is that...
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
Well, what are the other ways we could look at it?
I'm not sure.
Fair enough.
Surely defining what something is real is there has to be some kind of agreed framework between individuals to say this is real because it has
This is
an
what
effect.
counts as real. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean it's the old brain in a vat thing. You could be a brain in a vat with a bunch of other brains in vats, but as long as you're experiencing the same experience, I suppose, then you have like a framework of you can agree to some sort of consensus that this is real, I suppose.
And isn't that some of the objections some people might come across occasionally, is the fact that how can you trust your senses? Even if everybody's senses were saying the same thing, how can we, one, be sure that they're actually saying the same thing as each other and they're not just saying it is? And not because they're lying, just because they're perceiving it differently. But I mean, I don't know that when you look at blue...
Plato's cave as well.
Yeah, there is definitely elements of that as well. So yeah, so when we're talking about real, we're doing our best that we can to define something objective, but there is a perceptual component there where ultimately we can't have absolute certainty that something is real outside of perhaps our own thoughts. We can be sure that we're having those own thoughts. We can't be sure that we're not a brain in a vat that's having those thoughts. We can't be sure that we're not an algorithm in a simulation, but we can be at least sure that whatever is actually happening, we're having these thoughts going through our mind.
I mean, there's arguments that you can't.
I'm sure there's arguments for everything, Dave.
No, there isn't.
Especially on the internet. So, I suppose the main framework that people would probably fit into is some form of empiricism. You know, is that generally your experience as well, Dave, or do you think there's more rationalist views, or are there any other views that can, have for reality, or trying to scope it out?
There's the idealist view where everything simply is consciousness. So, yeah.
So are panpsychists actually idealists?
No, panpsychists are actually physicalists or materialists.
Actually, so I don't want to try and divert the conversation too much, but I saw something on panpsychism the other day that sort of made it make a little bit more sense. And it was just that it's the field of the electron, which is a field of consciousness. You know, physics describe what it sort of does and everything like that. But consciousness is what it is, even though it's not necessarily conscious in the way you or I are conscious. And it was like, yeah, I mean, it still seems like a big load of woo to me, but that was the closest I've seen to someone saying something that at least seemed somewhat coherent on the subject. So thank you, Mr. Goff. So with an idealist view, obviously everything is the mind. So then therefore you don't necessarily have this split of imagination and not, do you?
It would depend on how you look at it, because if everything out there is just a product of the mind, there is still the inner experience of any individual mind. So there's still that sort of separation between the mind out there and the mind in here, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on some of the take. If everything was just one mind experiencing itself in different ways, then would it all just be the same thing versus one mind has created loads of other minds? Would that, I don't know.
That sounds more like solipsism.
So from that would be the idealist view. So you would still have something sort of internal and external to mind, and I guess what would be real in that sense is still what is external to mind. But if everything is mind and you take all the minds away, there is nothing left.
There is nothing left, but that's a different framework from the one that works on.
Right.
That would be a more empirical or materialist or physicalist framework.
And so, I mean, generally speaking, to make it easy sort of for tonight, would it work best for us to stick to a particular framework?
I would say we're all physicalists or materialists, so that's probably the framework to stick with.
Okay.
It's probably better to talk about what we think about things rather than...
more than definitely. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, Andy, when you think about something that is real, how do you go about sort of making sure that, you know, maybe something goes by flash of an eye, and you're like, whoa, it seems unlikely. How do you go about working out whether that was real or not?
Example. Give me an example.
Well, just anything that goes by. Perhaps you saw something go by really fast. Maybe it looked like a dog was driving a car.
If it looked like a dog was driving a car, I would have probably just go to assume that my eyes were deceiving me, and it was likely that a dog was just sat in the front seat.
So it was perhaps a bit of an optical illusion.
So yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go for that example. I wouldn't go too much into. Well, I must research this. Do dogs actually drive cars? Does this happen? If I saw that, I thought, wow, that was funny. That looked like a dog was driving a car, and that's pretty much as far as it will go. I would have just assumed that my eyes were tricked in some way, because I know that dogs just don't drive cars, and I'm sure there are some that are at the moment
I'll prove you wrong,
somewhere.
Andy.
Yeah. Well, actually, my Rex, he's very astute at driving.
Some are really good at skateboarding, I must say.
I have seen a skateboarding dog, yes, but not one that's driving a car. Not a full-size one, anyway. That's a full-size car, not a full-size dog.
Yeah, to be fair, I have seen the ones of like the little kiddie electric cars where they've actually been doing that, but that obviously wasn't what I was referring to in this instance.
Yeah.
And Martine, are you sort of much the same? If you see something goes by really quickly, perhaps somewhat unlikely, do you take the time to try and, you know, track that down or look up news reports of did I really see that thing, or do you just sort of assume that you know, trick of the eye?
It depends. I mean, if I see like a dog driving a car, I just go on believing that I saw a dog driving a car because that's just so much more fun, right? And I do think that at some point reality does have to bend to our will, in the sense that we have to make our lives more fun than reality sometimes permits. So wherever I can, I do try to embrace like the whimsical and the fantastical a bit. But if it's something like serious, then that's a whole nother case, of course.
But would you go on and then say, I saw a dog driving a car to someone else? Yeah, fair enough. And then they'd go, no, you didn't. Shut up.
I mean, I like the idea.
An imagination, or their eyes playing tricks or something along those lines. And then they will be totally serious and be like, I saw this. This is definitely real.
It's true. I mean, I kind of like Martine's idea of being a little bit whimsical with stuff, though. That is great. And I'd almost put it into. We were having a conversation about this in the forum, as in the Answers in Reason group. But it was about things that you don't really believe, but you like to believe. So there's no actual belief there, but you sort of wish it was true, and it's not harming anyone. So why not? Yeah, fuck it. Dogs are driving cars. Wicked, you know. And so I do like that sort of whimsical attitude to it. It's definitely fun. But would you say, Martine, that when it comes down to it, you actually believe you saw it, or you're just happy to be like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to go with it?
There's a line, of course, between these. These are a spectrum, of course. I mean, a dog driving a car. I could believe a dog driving a car, but not at speeds that would make me be like, did I just see a dog driving a car? Right?
So if it was a dog driving a car really slowly.
Yeah, then I could believe that some dog owner was asinine enough to have it to have a try, right? So there are lines to these things, but no, typically I'd say I do believe things for fun in that sense. So it's maybe not an actual belief, but I do try to act like it and not search for information counter to the belief itself.
Yeah, that's fair. I can understand that. So I think it's fair to say then that when we're talking about things that could be part of the imagination, largely we'd all realize that they're not real, even if we decide to believe them for fun. You know, and what if something is a bit more closer to reality? It might be, well, that could have been true. I'll be a bit more on the fence about it. And if it was something important, maybe look it up and see if that thing happened. Because, you know, if it was something, even if it was a dog driving down the road, back to that one, I'm sure someone would have got a picture of that or recorded it happening, and you could check it out on the net if you although with AI these days, who knows what you who knows what you see is real.
Well,
Not to poke the bear or anything, Martin. So, what about things like axioms? So we've already said that numbers are one of those weird things that are sort of real in a certain light. The language perhaps is not real because that is something created by humans, but these units, these numerals or whatever, they are things that are real even without a mind there as such. You know, if we're talking about a single rock there, it doesn't matter whether there is anyone around to see it. There is one rock. We just don't necessarily have the language for either one or rock.
I'm not too sure about that actually.
Okay.
If there's no mind around to see the rock, wouldn't that rock just become part of the greater mountain or planet it originated from?
Well, Dave was saying earlier that these things are sort of more the numerals, everything that it relates back to, actually relates back to something. So it's not even necessarily a single unit as such. And I think this is why there's a debate about it, because I like you would probably lean towards that without there being the language there to describe the concept, you know, one rock just happens to be thing, and without even the words thing there. But if there is, you know, the referent that it relates back to is still one, that gives it a sort of version of being real, even though it doesn't necessarily have the causal efficacy of other things that are real. Is that about right, Dave, or have I bastardized that a bit too much?
No, that sounds right to me. I think when we're talking about a universe where there are no minds, we have no choice but to cushion the language in the language that we use. So when we say there would be one rock, we know that it would be a meaningless. There would be nothing in that universe to be able to describe them, but we can only refer to possible worlds through the language of our actual world.
And you know, the thing that we call a rock, and the fact that there is only one of them, that there would still only be one of them, even though the language isn't there. And so there's that line between, like, do we say that, okay, yeah, you know, the one, there is that one object there, regardless of whether there's any minds, there's still that one object. We don't have to give the number form for that form to sort of be there in the background.
Yeah, but that's not really what I was getting at. I think it's the people who separate what is one object or the one object from the other. So the whole point of numbers, without the brains to interpret them, would be that everything is one thing, basically.
So at the lowest common denominator for everything is one.
More or less.
It is just the universe. There is no separation between all the different things. It is just the universe. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly that.
And I can agree with that as well. And it wouldn't even necessarily be one universe. That you don't have to put that on there. And I kind of see the same myself. Like, I think of numbers in that way. They are, even though they are not necessarily real in the sense that the rock that we were referring to is real. They can be objectively true, and there are systems built around these numbers, and you can have right and wrong, but they're not necessarily real. But I don't want to get into the debate about whether they're real or not too much, because I don't know enough about that debate, if I'm honest. I'm happy to go with, some people will say that yes, they are real, even though they have no causal efficacy, whereas others won't. Just out of curiosity, I sit in the camp that, numbers aren't real in the objective sense that a rock is real. What about the rest of you? Let's start with you, Andy.
I don't know. I don't know. Convince me, one way or the other.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll come back to you and we'll have a quick chat with Martijn and Dave, and we'll see where you're at then. So, Martijn, I think you were basically alluding to before that you don't see the numbers as having any reality to them at all.
No, I think they're abstract representation of amounts we encounter in the world, basically.
Yeah. And do you agree that once you have the concept of a number, you do have true and false statements that can be made about them?
About numbers themselves?
Yeah, so like 1 + 1 is 2.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. Of course, that's simply because it's man-made and intersubjective in that sense, right?
Even if no one agreed on it, but we had the concept of there is the number 1 and the number 2, and you put two rocks together, and the number 2 represented 2 ones, but no one agreed to it. It'd still be the fact that these are 2, wouldn't they? Do you need that intersubjective agreement about the way numbers work, is what I'm trying to get at?
Well, you're going to need them to get numbers in the first place.
I suppose without an agreed framework of numbers, it's a bit of a non-starter, so you can't get any further than that. So yeah, once you've got your numbers, you got your reference nailed down, the rest of it starts flowing through, and the basic sort of axioms from addition, subtraction, and things like that, they all sort of fall into place. And it's, once someone has agreed of what numbers are, if they then disagree that 1 + 1 is 2, they're just wrong.
Yeah, basically.
And what about you, Dave? Where do you land on this particular one?
I'm sort of agnostic on it for the moment. I think that there is something very kind of there's something that appears to be slightly more real to numbers, like 1 plus 1 would equal 2 regardless of whether anybody existed or not. Even if a universe didn't exist, 1 plus 1 would still be 2. You could use numerals, say use binary, but you're still expressing 1 plus 1 equals 2. And you can't will 1 plus 1 to not be 2. And you can't imagine coherently 1 plus 1 not being 2.
Yeah. Even if you're someone using binary like 1 plus 1 equals 10, that's just the binary representation of 2.
Yeah, those things are still referring to numbers. But I'm sort of agnostic on it.
Okay. So Martain is of the opinion that, without people agreeing what the numbers are, that the numbers themselves, they don't actually exist. They in a mindless universe, there are no numbers. The numbers are basically the language that we give to describe a concept of a unit of something, and again, a unit is something that we've used to describe the language of. You get so reductive with it that you're just like, well, it used to be we just said or we said and that became 1 and 2. But right. And so, Andy, having listened to Martain and Dave, is there any way that you feel about this thing? Do you think that there could be something more to numbers, that they, even though the language perhaps that we give to numbers is man-made, the numbers themselves exist?
The description of the numbers, is man-made, and without that you cannot identify. So I agree with Martin in that sense. But there is, it's really tough because there are some numbers that are just like things like numbers that crop up over and over again in certain in like geometry and all that kind of stuff. Is that just a human representation of it, and is it just coincidence that it keeps reoccurring, or is there something else? Is it a constant within the universe?
Is that sort of talking about sequences like the Fibonacci sequence and things like that?
Yeah,
or have I misunderstood you?
things like even
Pythagoras' theorem.
basically.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, things like that, and they're constant, but it's taken like it's the human representation of, with Pythagoras' a squared plus b squared equals c squared, is identifying that and using maths and numbers to assign meaning to it. So I mean, I'm on the fence here.
Are the numbers being used to explain something that already exists? They're in some way, or shape, or form.
Is the numbers represent what already exists in the human world that we've kind of defined anyway? Is it just a representation of what we've already defined? So yeah, it's a difficult one, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a difficult one. I kind of think that it's almost impossible to say for at least someone as uneducated as me.
Sure.
Because there is so much that you can say about numbers and how they sort of, we've used them to explain so many things, and they work in so many ways, and we've built all of these different axioms around them, and it all just works. So
But a lot of science is just based on it. A lot of inventions and everything is based on a lot of mathematical equations. You know, and a lot of the stuff that we've done and as humans, obviously a lot of mistakes have been made as well. But it's all. But again, is that just applying the already defined human view of the world, just in maths or in numbers?
I don't know.
It's tough to say. Yeah.
Bible says, if one isn't real, how can you have one rock? Well, even if there isn't a real thing called the number one, we're just using our language. So you can have one rock by the way that we're using it to describe it. Even if we met a culture where the number 3 was what we refer to as the number one, it's using the same reference. So they might go 3 rock, meaning 1 rock to us. It's just a translation. You can notice this in other languages, not just numbers, but you know, if you take the French pomme de terre, which was fruit of the ground and then became apple of the ground.
Apple of the ground, yeah.
Yeah, originally it was just fruit of the ground though, before pomme became apple. And it's just potato, and the actual translation is not the same thing as what the words are saying. And if you can think about that, you can think about so many concepts broken down to actually you've just got to tie it back to what it's referring to for it to make sense.
Yeah. I mean, even French numbers, they've got like 420s and stuff like that, rather than 80 or whatever it was. It's
actually,
like that,
we need Per right now because he was going through Danish numbers, and apparently they're even more confusing.
Wow.
Yes, yeah. So, Per, next time you are checking out this rerun, this is a reminder for you to just record some of the weird things that happen in Danish numbers. So with that in mind, whether we think that numbers are real or not, in that sense, if we were to, for a moment, all of us, just say that we would say, okay, they are real, would axioms based on those numbers be real too?
It would depend on the axiom, surely.
Would it, any axiom that's based on numbers that sort of has any true result? Let's just say making a perfect circle, or the circumference of a circle, or you know, anything like that, or Pythagoras' theorem, any of those sorts of things, or something a bit more involved than that.
Well, circles and squares don't actually exist in reality, so they wouldn't be describing something real.
No, I mean, I guess the circle.
I mean, they don't exist in nature.
Yeah, but I think that's where Dave was coming from. They're not a naturally occurring thing, and I don't know if it's actually possible for someone to even make one. Like, I'm sure it will be with technology one day. So okay, so. But getting the circumference of a circle.
But yeah, no, I agree that axioms are real things. They describe the numbers, and if numbers are real, then axioms have the same kind of reality that numbers do.
Okay, so even if the concept itself, like a circle, doesn't exist properly, we have circle-like things in nature, but we have no true circles in nature. But if using maths, we can describe what a perfect circle is using this formula, then that formula itself, that axiom would be real. So if the numbers are not real, could any axiom like that be considered real?
What do you mean?
Well,
Sorry.
I'm sort of going on the
On
other
the
side
flip
of
side,
it. Yeah, like we're saying that. Okay, yeah. I mean, I
Well,
think it's the opposite answer, if I'm honest. But I'm just
it
making
would be
sure.
no then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if the numbers are not real,
If the numbers are definitely not real, then surely the
Yeah.
axioms definitely aren't real.
yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was a true dichotomy there between the two. That there wasn't some weird in between, where you could have the fact that numbers weren't real, but there could be an axiom that actually is. So there can be mathematical truths, and so depending on your take on numbers, that would sort of depend on your take of whether these mathematical truths are real. Would that be fair? What if we go into sort of something where, mathematically speaking, it was proved that there actually are, say, 10 dimensions to the universe? The numbers aren't real. For whatever reason, the numbers aren't real, but the math shows that there are 10 dimensions to the universe. Would that be real, or would that just be someone playing with numbers far too much?
Well, if it was proved to be real, then it would be real.
Right. So
yeah, how would you prove it to be real for a start?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
So again, that comes back down to the fact that it would have to be proven to be real, but it could be proven real without the numbers being real in and of themselves. So there is the possibility that,
I mean, with maths, there's a lot that you can prove, and it's all in theory, and that's all it can be for certain things. But you would then have to go and try to empirically prove it, rather than just, oh, the numbers check out, so it must be real.
yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
It would also just be equally real as the 4 dimensions we live in now, which also blend into each other to some degree, of course. I guess space time and all that, right? So the question is, at first, whether we're actually correct in saying that we live in the 3 dimensions plus time that we do.
Yeah, you're getting way above my pay grade with that question.
I thought the 4th dimension being time was not really a thing. I thought the 4th dimension was something that we can't, as humans, conceptualize.
Time is the property of gravity.
But like, obviously, we know 3 dimensions exist, but a 4th dimension that we can't. When we look, we can see things 2-dimensionally. We can only see things flat. We can't see a cube. We just know that there's a cube because we can feel it.
It's the whole flatland sort of thought, isn't it?
A 4th dimension, so someone that's 4th dimensionally can actually see things in 3 dimensions, if that makes sense. It's, again, theories and views.
And it's hard to get your mind around it because you've always viewed
because you can't
things in the way that you have. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So,
or it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, no, it makes well, yeah, no, it just makes sense at how confused I am.
yeah. Well, yeah.
So, if we were to say that, axioms, mathematical axioms, mathematical truths can, if numbers are true, then they would be true. Otherwise, real. Otherwise, they might not be real in that sense if numbers are not real. they can still be correct even if they are not real in the sense that we are talking about tonight. So you can have an objectively correct or incorrect bit of math or use of an axiom or anything like that. So I assume that would be the same for any sort of abstract idea that someone has to contemplate anything. If someone, I mean, if we were to think about like the concept of justice and law, Martin, I know this is something that you quite enjoy as a topic, the whole political philosophy side. Would you say that the concept of justice, which was born of someone's idea, is another thing that is perhaps not real?
I would, yeah. Same goes for law, borders, money to a certain degree.
Only a certain degree. Why only a certain degree with money?
Because the same reason that I do think that there's something to be said for well, also still for the as well, for numbers, sorry, is that the fact that everybody uses them and does believe they are real makes them real in some sense.
I suppose another way you
Does
could
go
put it
for
as well
other
is
things too, though.
money to a certain degree represents a value that could be for something else. So it's an exchangeable value in the sense of, say, you've got a phone and you've got £300, and that phone for £300, and you don't have to carry with you, oh yeah, I've got 1,000 bags of flour for that phone that I want to buy. I've sold my flour for £300, and therefore I can buy that phone that costs £300. And there's a utility to money that, even though the broader concept of money isn't necessarily real, there is a realness to it.
It's a fiction that we share for pragmatic reasons.
That's a
Well,
good way
yeah,
to put it.
there is, but I do think there's a lot of room to argue that that use has
I
since
think Martin just died. Oh, there.
Hmm?
No, you're still there. I think it might have been
Okay.
Dave.
No, I just do think that utility has since become far less, especially since when you look at the politics of it all for a moment, the reason we're not solving a lot of problems is because of this thing of our own invention that we don't have enough of now, which is very jarring, to be honest.
We don't have enough of what, sorry?
Well, money.
Yeah.
There's not enough money. Where do we get the money? That sort of stuff. But you make the money.
Yeah.
It's your invention. You're doing the thing. Just do the thing.
Yeah.
That's my frustration personally.
Yeah, and to a degree, there should be no debt because money doesn't really even exist in the first place.
Basically, yeah.
Sorry. So I think there is at least something to say that about these concepts that, even though they're not necessarily really real, they do have an impact on reality, especially money. That's a big one that has a massive impact. And you could say the same thing about the concept of justice and law and politics. Again, these things are concepts that do have real impact. They don't have causal efficacy. The people using them perhaps do. Would that be fair to say, Dave?
Yeah, the things that we believe about them give them some kind of causal power, but it's us bringing about those causal powers through the sort of shared agreements They're efficient causes rather than having causal efficacy, to put it in a sloppy way.
So that would say that to a degree, these concepts, they're at the very least imagined things, or were imagined till they were brought forth more. So there is some impact from the imagination in shaping our reality. It doesn't shape the original reality; it shapes the reality that we live in now. But how else, outside of things like concepts, could the imagination shape reality? Dave?
It doesn't so much shape reality, because imagining a border existing doesn't create a border in the land. It creates a sort of agreement in our minds that there exists this long line where this country owns this bit and this country owns the other bit, and the countries are imaginations. So it doesn't bring them about in reality. They're just constructed. It's a sense of constructivism that we share. I mean, if people were to suddenly say, you know, I don't agree that the Canadian-American border exists there, it doesn't. It would be people enforcing that who all have the power to agree on it. Other ways that it might shape reality is laws.
Yeah.
Agreements on good acting, bad acting, that kind of thing.
The internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose this can all shape, again, our understanding of reality as well. Some people might imagine certain things so strongly that they begin to see reality itself as a completely different thing to what the general agreement is.
Trump is a good person.
I don't think you should even say things like that.
Yeah, but the belief is actually shaping that reality for some people.
Yeah, but Dave, you know, I'm just gonna take a little screen cap of that, and
that's Dave's soundbite. Trump is a good person.
Oh, we've got two saying it now.
And you have two now.
Yeah, that's great for the out of context group. So that is interesting though, because yeah, certain things that we imagine or strongly believe can shape how we see reality and what's going on around us. You see it by the people that feel.
Well, here's another recent example. The belief that an election was stolen caused a whole bunch of people to gather and try to overthrow a government.
Yeah, exactly.
You're talking about Brazil, right?
I'm talking about most countries over the last 100 years.
I did actually have another one in my mind of what I was going on there, but it's jumped straight out. But I'm with you there. The way that you perceive the world can strongly influence exactly how everything is perceived, and some people might believe something so strongly that they can't have the same understanding. So it shapes their reality. It doesn't actually change what reality is, but it strongly changes their understanding of the reality. The imagination can essentially overpower what is real, which is fantastic way to segue into delusions and hallucinations. Because these are things that are real in the sense that they happen in our mind. They're real to the person that they are happening to. There's a real process going on in the brain. So could we say that the delusion or a hallucination has causal efficacy?
No.
I would say no.
So even if that particular thing that was misfiring in their mind to make them believe that, I don't know, someone was on fire or they were being attacked,
the delusion itself doesn't have the causal efficacy. It's the power, and it's the actual brain and the synapses and neurological things that have the causal efficacy that cause the delusion.
So it, in some respects, could you view it as a catalyst?
What you mean?
Well, if these synapses were firing in such a way and they were not producing the hallucination, the delusion, they weren't, so therefore the person didn't get that fake visual or whatever was going on, would the same sort of thing be happening? You'd still have the efficacy of the neurons firing, but you wouldn't have the I guess the feedback loop. You know, the neurons fire.
That's what it is a feedback loop.
Yeah. Guess I answered my own question then. So do you think that things like delusions challenge the notion of reality in any way?
I don't know what you mean.
Let's say that there are people that have certain delusions, and quite often, I mean, when it comes to delusions, they quite often fall into buckets. People often end up believing the same sort of things. You know, maybe they're the Messiah or they're a king. It's often to do with power and protection and things like that. I mean, I'm making massive sweeping statements here, but there's certain things going on with power and fear and everything. But there are also some people who have certain delusions that make them seem more aware to certain things as well. They're more intuitive because of their delusions. Could that give any credence to the idea that there is more to reality than what we're actually usually able to perceive?
I don't know enough about the topic to be able to say.
Either of you?
I'd like it.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're talking about like the person who believes they're a witch and therefore they, I don't know, understand the flora and fauna or something better or whatever.
I mean, maybe they do. Maybe there's a naturally inbuilt thing there. Maybe
well,
they.
I'd like that to be a sign of the idea that the world works in different ways than we can now see. Anyway, but also far from an expert on that, but I do think that our typically very scientific way of viewing the world does sort of rob us from those kinds of things. But that's basically the same point as the whimsical at the start of the stream. I do think there needs to be a bit more room just to accept that kind of a mystery as a mystery instead of saying, that's a kook, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I think there's some people who are incredibly perceptive. They can, even without training, they can pick up on things about people or rooms or situations or anything like that. And some of that can come down to, I don't know, high IQ or whatever. But there are also things where people seem to almost see through things, not even looking at the room and working things out about the room. Like you mentioned there, Martin, about there could be just someone who just is naturally understands plants in a way that no one else does. They have this sort of a affinity to it, and put them under a microscope, we'd say that they were having delusions about the things that were going on. But maybe there's something that we don't understand at the same time. So this is what I'm saying with the, are we taking that scientific knife to everything and saying, no, this is definitely the way reality is? Or could certain delusions and hallucinations and things like that actually be an insight into the fact that this isn't everything? On the whimsical side too, I agree with you, Martin. I like to believe that there is more. Unfortunately, I don't, but I do like to think that there could be, and that So there is something that we briefly touched on earlier, and that was sort of collective fictions. I guess social constructs and things like that. Fictions that are either useful in some way, or fictions that are things that describe really things in another way. Like, for example, the sun doesn't actually rise, but we still call it the sunrise and the sunset because of the way it appears to us. They are a fiction. There are other fictions like money, which has a really, really strong impact in the way the world is governed. It is used absolutely everywhere. People are kidnapped because they want money. The crimes are done. People are killed. Banks are held up. All over this thing that doesn't really exist. And then you have people who have ideas that abolishing money is completely unrealistic. Yet money isn't even real in and of itself. Doesn't that seem a bit of a perplexing one in itself, a bit of a contradiction as well?
They just want to get rid of the concept of money, don't they? Not the actual. Because if money doesn't actually exist, they just want to get rid of the human concept of getting paid X amount for doing whatever, and then paying out for whatever you want.
Do either of you have anything you'd like to add to that as well?
Not necessarily, I don't think.
No. So with that sort of thing, though, let's just say the idea of abolishing money, that's considered completely unrealistic, and probably because it's so tied into everything that we do. It's the way the entire society, every society, is governed.
Well, yeah. Also, just try for a second to imagine a world where money doesn't exist. It's
Star Trek.
It's so terribly ingrained in us that most people can't really make a realistic, form themselves a realistic image of a world without any kind of currency. Which is actually really strange, because for most of our history we have functioned perfectly well without currencies. So, and you see also in places where there's disasters, where currencies aren't as trustworthy at those moments, then it doesn't really matter if somebody has access to those currencies, because that help that comes from the bottom up will help everyone. It's a fairly controversial way of seeing it, I guess, but there are ways in which a society without money would be possible, but people just don't have the imagination because they've never seen the possibility of something else, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I mean, if you think about history, though, a lot of it was there was at least something to barter for. So there was at least...
Depends how far back you go.
Sure. But if we think about trading culture, there's always been something that I'll give you this in exchange for this, rather than it just being, I guess, a free for all. And the thing that I think makes it a harder concept is actually thinking about there being no money. So why would a farmer still carry on farming if there was nothing for him to gain, yet you were still taking his crops?
Well, to be honest, we had that system after we invented money for a long time too. The idea that a farmer would just farm for like half the year until he had enough to, you know, for the rest of the year, and then he would just shut down the farm and go and enjoy his free time. That's a system we also had. And when you read the book Debt, the first 5,000 years by David Graeber, he tells us that there never really was a bartering fee. So the whole fact that everybody always talks about the barter society, that too is a sort of a deception. What was so there was tokenized trade, which means that there were one, two, or three non-goods that could be consumed in times of need that would substitute for money. So there has always been, for as long as our societies have grown like this, that there has been something like money. But before that, there were just groups who would take care of each other because they depended on each other for survival. That is also a route you could take. There are a lot of different ways to just restructure society without necessarily having the restrictive qualities that money bears with it.
Yeah, that's a lot to take in.
I typically am.
I think as Dave, as in Lone Wolf, says, as long as there are limits to resources, there will be a premium cost to using rare and valuable resources.
Well, that's when we get to another problem with money, which is that the prices we pay are typically also deceitful. Deceitfully low, by the way, not deceitfully high. But and that has to do with the fact that we never compensate for the cost of extracting a lot of these resources. So, yeah and no, I guess, but yeah, it's complicated.
I think if we were to just think about like moving sort of forward into a time when there wasn't an energy issue, there weren't any limits to any resources, and therefore there wasn't necessarily so much in the way of a cost. I think of the sort of idealistic sort of Star Trek style where, you know, your food is replicated by energy, there's no animals harmed, but everybody who works, they work because they're doing something they want to do. No one actually has to do anything. And part of me struggles with that, because if no one actually has to do anything, I think you'd have a lot more lazy people who did absolutely nothing if they could. I struggle to believe there'd be so many people motivated to, I mean, being in Starfleet, I could sort of understand, see the universe, but the people who decide that they want to run bars or clear away trash or something like that, I have trouble imagining there being so many people who go, do you know what? I know what I want to do with the rest of my life. I want to clear up shit.
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure. The first part would be a problem. That a lot of people would be lazy and not want to do anything. I mean, why would we care if other people are not doing anything? in their lives. Well, they could be doing things that they enjoy, right? So I would really classify that as a them problem. When it then comes to the way the more nasty jobs of society get handled, you could just I don't know, work with shifts on that or something, right? To say like I'll do it this week, you do it that week, continue on like that.
Yeah, I mean, as Lone Wolf says, like the idea is actually predicated on limitless resources and the automation of menial processes. Yet the way it's displayed, there's still so many people who are doing things like service jobs that they wouldn't necessarily need to do. And I don't know. I mean, I've done a lot of different service jobs, and there are times when I've had a lot of fun doing them, and I really have, and I can understand the appeal to doing them, but I can't imagine if there was limitless resources, and you can literally just press a button to get whatever drink you want. That there'd be that many people that would want to tend bar and run restaurants and things like that.
Maybe not.
I mean, maybe that's a lack of my own imagination.
Well, a lot of this also depends on the kind of dynamics you build when you do make such a switch. Right? I personally believe something about that we. When I got taught about the Romans and the Greeks in school, they told me that they had such a cultural explosion because a lot of people had extra time. And to me, honestly, that should be the goal of human civilization. Just to free up everybody's time, we can do things that are far more worthwhile than the menial little tasks we do day in, day out just to keep a roof over our heads, right? So I think that inherent to many, if not all, of the problems we face as humanity is the fact that we've just simply lost our way in that part of our existence.
Do you know what can do those menial tasks? AI.
Are we going to get into this? Because
I think I'm just poking the bear.
There we go. Well, then the other resource is saying AI is digital, and I have just already said that the digital part is no less real than the godmother I believe in.
So yeah, I mean, I think that we can agree that there are certain things that would be benefits and detriments to perhaps just abolishing money, and the way that you got there, it would have to be done right. You would have to have all the processes in place. You would have to have limitless resources.
Without a reward for doing jobs, there would need to be a punishment for not doing jobs.
Yeah, and then you'd end up in a form of dystopia, and you wouldn't want that either. Or there'd be something, again, like Brave New World, where people are conditioned from birth to love a certain job, and you wouldn't want that either. So, yeah, but if pretty much everything can be automated, if it's all done through some form of AI, all the messy jobs and the menial tasks are done, and then it comes about people following their passions, whatever those passions end up being. And we're getting way into the future of fictions, but I do enjoy these fictions, and sometimes these fictions can be inspiring. These fictions themselves can be something that makes people want to work towards that. At the moment, it's a fiction of a place having no money and every menial task being automated, and then people just follow their desires right? There's no punishment or anything like that. There's no reward system. The reward is you're able to, you know what? I'm just gonna hack away at wood and make what I like out of wood because that's my passion. And you know what? I'm just gonna swim every single day because that's what I want to do. And people are left to do their own thing. And yeah, you might even have a problem with some people who are unbelievably lazy and do nothing. But who knows? Being in a world where everyone isn't so trodden down by society, where everything is taken care of, maybe people will be inspired to do more. Maybe the fact that the choice is that they could actually just do nothing, there'd be less people inspired to do nothing. There's a lot of maybes in there.
But even if a lot of people were going to do nothing, I mean, what's it of yours?
Sorry, say again?
What's it of yours that that people might not want to do anything though?
I mean,
I mean,
nothing.
Yeah, no, but
If
that's
we're
the
in
point,
if
right?
we're in a situation where that it can be done, then what issue is there?
Mhm.
No, I agree.
Yeah, exactly.
The only issue you might have is if you had people who were, and I'm sure if you got to a state in society where there'd be less of this, but if people were overly belligerent with it, or they decided, no, well, what I want to do with my life is paint everybody's windows red and, you know, public disorder type things, you'd still need some form of law and order there.
Yeah, maybe.
And for a society to keep moving, there are certain things that need to be done that might not be as nice, and maybe no one wants to do them. So therefore, that job would either need to be shared or divvied out, or some unfortunate lottery. We're getting into like Black Mirror territory, aren't we?
But don't you think there are
Well,
plenty of people who actually really love science and would want to pursue? I mean, if there was no limit to the budget and the experiments that they could do, as long as they had the time and safety procedures in place, they could actually investigate everything. And don't you think that there is plenty of people who have the passion for that sort of thing? And things would continue to move forward. You wouldn't have to force people to do this stuff because there are people that love it. I love programming, you know. I'd love to get paid a hell of a lot more to do it, but actually, if it came to it, it's one of the things that I actually get a lot of pleasure out of doing. So same with doing things like podcasting and all of that. Like, these are things that if I lived in a society where I could do it all day every day, I could split my time programming and podcasting, I'd be so happy. And maybe I'd be doing more stuff on the move. And you think about, you know, maybe one day I'll make apps that other people would like. But I wouldn't be doing it for the sake of any reward. I'd be doing it because I've like, hey, look at what I've done. I've enjoyed this. Maybe you'll enjoy it too. And you can see that from a scientific perspective as well. Oh, look, I've just made a way for our ships to travel twice the speed. I thought that'd be quite cool. You know, I'm going to try and do it 3 times next month.
Also, there's something exceptionally bitter about saying that we have to force people to do certain tasks, whether it's through the use of money or through the use of some other sort of force. I do think that is particularly bitter. I would want to, at the very least, try to escape it, and at the most, actually just deny it. I mean, maybe if we have to force people to do some of those jobs, maybe those jobs aren't particularly worthwhile to have around anymore, or we have to do them in different ways, or etc. Right?
Yeah. Just catching up on the chat. Nice to see you, Luke. I'm glad to have you here. Can always jump on if you want, Luke. If you want to know what the chit chat is, well, we started chatting about reality and what's real, and we're now into science fiction, fantasy, future, worlds and things like that, and talking about like we've gone through delusions. It'd have been great if you were here for that bit. You could have really helped us answer a couple of questions, but no, you have to be living your life with your beautiful girlfriend. How dare you?
Being all fancy.
um And you're right, yes, universal basic wage with higher salaries for important undesirable roles. Yes, that would be lovely. I don't think we'll get there anytime soon. But that sort of ties into something that I do want to talk about. Like, we can fantasize about certain things. So think about the way off into the future fantasy that we were just discussing, or perhaps the even more fantasy side, orcs and elves and magic and mysticism. We might not think it's true in any way, shape, or form, but we can love those conversations and do it. But a really normal suggestion like universal basic wage with higher salaries for important or undesirable roles, or universal healthcare. These are always met with such skepticism, or even repulsiveness, like treated as if they're repugnant ideas. Why is that? Why are these like minor improvements treated so poorly? Especially when a certain level of fantasy is completely allowed. Any of you?
Well, because people are just afraid of the things they don't know, and typically their experience is most likely been that they'll get fucked by whoever proposes such a measure, because that's what politicians have been doing since, at the very least, the late 80s.
What about you, Dave? Yeah, you've been quiet for a little while. Have you got anything to add here? No?
Falling asleep.
we getting past your bedtime.
Over that
Yeah.
Don't forget, I'm 97 years old.
Age isn't real.
Yeah, it's just numbers, and numbers aren't
It's a
real. And time is an illusion. It's all happening at once, but there is no once. What about you, Andy? Is there anything that you've got to add at this stage?
Not about what we've just been talking about, I don't think. There was one interesting concept that I listened to. I believe it was one of the Stephen Fry podcasts, where he was talking about how it was more energy that was the what was used to pay for things. So your energy and time goes into doing something for someone else, who puts their energy and time providing things for other people, and you're paid in energy, essentially. So you pay your energy to someone else, and then they use it to provide other things for other people. It was quite an interesting concept, and money was just a representation of that energy.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Some people get more per their energy unit. Some people get less, but that's essentially what it is. You're giving your energy to someone else.
And I suppose some people put higher values on certain uses of energy, even if there are other things that are more valuable in different lights. I mean, you could say the doctor, the fireman, the nurse, the dentist, the things that they do are technically far more valuable than, say, the person that kicks or throws a ball around. Yet, due to consumerism, their energy is rewarded to a higher degree.
Yep. That's one of the reasons why it's tough to give the undesirable jobs a higher wage, because most of the time these undesirable jobs do not generate any income.
Yeah, I mean, you even see the similar problem in a lot of companies where they want a return on investment and they want you to make money, basically. And it could be that you can save them a lot of money, but because you're not making money, they're less interested in the idea. You go to go to a business plan where you can make the company an extra 10% if they do this one thing. They'll be really interested. But if you say the same thing and you go, oh, I can cut your costs by sort of like 50%, in a year, you'll suddenly see this money. They'll be like, no, I want the 10. I want the 10%.
That's
Depends
not
how forward thinking
entirely
they are.
true,
I
but
know
yeah.
it's not how but like a lot of ideas which come forward. If you're thinking about like process improvement, they'll want to build new processes that will generate new money rather than refine an old process so that they don't need to spend as much money on said process and so on.
I mean, if you can, in my experience, if you can provide a numerical figure, how much money that you're not going to have to spend, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to save you 3 hours of managers' works per day or whatever. If you can assign a number on that, they will likely to be like, okay.
I think it depends on the company. It depends on the work stream that you're in as well. I mean, there are a lot of companies that just don't think that way. I've been part of companies where they just, the only thing that they care about is the next income, the next stream of income. Rather,
it was Kristen speaking last week as well. She worked for a funeral directors company or something like that.
Ages and ages ago.
And she said that she improved the processes and turned around cooking everything within a couple of days as opposed to the usual week. They're like, no, don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Don't know why, but
anyway. No, you get people. This is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. We're not going to change. And they'd probably been up for.
And I wish they weren't real.
You do get a lot of that, though. You do get a lot of, if it was, instead of that, it was, oh look, here's a marketing campaign that's bringing in an extra 3 people per day to us. It'd have been like, oh yeah, great, we're going to get more people through the door, which is kind of a bad one for that particular environment. But they're getting more business in. They're like, yeah, but actually the idea of saving time and effort it puts a bad taste in their mouth. And it's like, well, again, it does come back to the business. It comes down to the manager. It comes down to the people that you're presenting to. It comes down to the way you present it as well. But you do tend to see that people will go for the, ooh, this is more, rather than, ooh, this is less. And, so earns more rather than spends less. It's just, I think it's something to do with the way our mind works in general. Crazy. Hello, Claire. Nice to see you. Glad to have you here. Just catching up on a couple of the chat messages. So Wolf says, in the case of athletes, the idea is that they have to make their lifetime salaries in fewer years, and doctors can be doctors for longer than a linebacker. You see, I tend to disagree, though. I mean, you're right in the time frame that they can do, but then they can go on to be coaches, they can go on to be managers, plus the amount that they're pundits, as you say, and the amount that they make in the years that they're actually playing, they make way more than a doctor does in their entire life. So if it actually all balanced out, yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't. And it's because of how many tickets and advertisements and everything like that is generated by these things. They're paid not because of a logical thing like you mentioned, Lone Wolf. They're paid that way because they bring more money in for other businesses and things, unfortunately. So
all the sponsorship deals, all that money that comes in, shirt sales, tickets sales, anything like that.
Totally. So what about things that perceptual oddities. So if we think about light waves for a second, now the colors red and blue, they have their own sort of wave on the spectrum. But when they cross, they make magenta. Magenta doesn't actually have, or purple, doesn't have its own light wave. So in that sense, does purple actually exist, or magenta? I mean, Dave, would you say red and blue exist? Then maybe not the language, but red and blue because there's actual light waves that they travel on. Do they exist?
I think they exist in the imagination.
So the actual light waves that
No, the colors.
right. So are the light waves the things that have the causal efficacy to create the color in the imagination?
Yeah.
So what then of
And the actual synapses and the neurons and everything like that, and the way that we've evolved, that's what creates the color in our consciousness and our mind.
so if I'm say like red and blue, let's just say I'm talking about the light wave. It doesn't matter how it appears to an individual at this stage. Red and blue, they exist because they have causal efficacy, because they are these light waves, and everything that goes on to then make the color red and blue appear to us is the end result. But what about magenta? Like, there is no light wave for magenta. It is literally the clashing of two different light waves.
Yeah, and
So if red and blue do exist, does magenta exist, or is that just, say, a
well,
trick?
if colors are things that exist in the mind rather than out there, then they exist in our minds. The clashing of the light wave has the causal efficacy to create the image in our consciousness, in our mind. They're not something that exists outside of the consciousness and the mind.
No, but the light wave do. But there
Yeah.
is no light wave for magenta.
There is no color.
So there
Yeah,
is that.
but
That is the
again-
clash.
But again, the magenta doesn't exist out there. It exists because of the way the light waves are processed in our mind. So magenta exists as a product of a mind.
Yes, but only as a product of a mind. As Dave says in the chat, of how the rods and cones work in our eyes, and then obviously everything. It's basically a distinct error processing bred into our hardware. So in some respects, so red and blue aren't errors. What it presents, the way we see it, that may be, just an experience that we have. But red and blue in the light wave sense, they actually exist. Whereas magenta is
If you're going to use the colors in our mind as a type identity to say blue exists and blue is the light wave, the blue doesn't exist apart from as some kind of phenomenal
the waves,
experience.
yeah. Well,
the waves happen.
Yeah,
blue is the phenomenal experience, not the waves.
Agreed, but it's easier to say blue light wave than the 310 hertz or whatever it is.
I know what you mean when you say blue light waves, but the magenta light wave is just this clashing.
There
of
is
two
no
other
magenta light wave.
No. The magenta color is just the clashing of two light waves in our mind, and the magenta exists in our mind. But blue doesn't exist out there. Blue is the same as the magenta. It's just a product of light waves hitting cones.
Yeah, so there you go. I've looked it up
Someone with
now.
different cones would see a different color.
Yes, or more colors. There are people who have an extra cone in their eye, and they tend to see.
But say a dog seeing the same light waves.
Yep.
Might not see the same color. It might be something else. So blue doesn't exist out there. There is no blue light wave.
No, this is true. And we also don't know that every human who sees blue as blue sees blue the same way, even if it looks, say the people aren't colorblind or anything like that. We don't know if there's any neurological issues. We don't know that when we look at blue that we're all seeing blue together. We're just talking about our translation of that. It's always called the same thing. Every time we see this wavelength translated into our brains, we go, oh, that's blue.
Even somebody with reverse qualia, even if they were having a different experience, would still point to the same thing and call it blue, even if they're seeing red.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of what I meant, though. There is the wavelengths that they're all going at. The color blue goes at.
But I wouldn't class the phenomenal experience of blue as identical to the light wave.
Yeah, that's fair. I wouldn't say experience in general is the same as anything out there.
It's the same between numerals and numbers.
Could say that, I guess. But you could even say it's the same way, like some people like their back being stroked and other people don't like it. They get a different experience from it. It's the same sort of thing happening. They're having a different experience from the same thing, and that's sort of what I'm saying with a wavelength that we happen to be calling blue. Like a backstroke is obviously the wavelength, and then the reaction is obviously the color. Someone will go, oh yeah, and someone will go, and that's the same thing as one person seeing blue and another person seeing, I don't know, green, but we're just all calling it the same thing. So the experience aside, scientifically speaking, magenta doesn't actually exist because there is no wavelength for it to travel on. And would we say though that there is any sort of existent for like emergent properties like that, things that are they don't have a distinct existence on their own? Are there things that are said that they could still be seen as real? And I'm not talking about just real in the mind. So maybe this is
consciousness,
example, right?
Consciousness.
Okay.
Consciousness isn't something that exists on its own. It's an emergent property of our actual nervous systems in our brain.
So, unless you're a panpsychist.
Yeah, but then you're just wrong.
So, with something like consciousness, that is something that I guess we would say is definitely real, because it's something that has causal efficacy.
Does it though?
Well, I don't know. Would we move around the way we did if we didn't have consciousness?
Is consciousness just the processing of our environment that we have that brings about the experience, the first person experience?
So is consciousness magenta?
Something like that,
yeah. That's interesting, actually, thinking about it that way. I know that's like an oversimplification of it, but is it something like magenta, or is it something like blue? If you
consciousness itself doesn't have causal efficacy; it's epiphenomenal. The processing brings about certain experiences, and our experiences can bring about certain processing, but it's not the consciousness that's causing the thing.
Again, it's another way to feedback.
Yeah, consciousness isn't something that exists in the same, if you go by the illusionist view or the not reductive physicalism, eliminativism There is no such thing as consciousness. It's just this experience that we have due to processing.
So consciousness could be just an error in the same way that magenta is.
Not quite, but yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just oversimplifying it again, and I know when you oversimplify things to that, they become a bit absurd. But if you think about it in those terms, it's to say that it's not real seems hard to think about, because the entire experience that we have is based on our consciousness, and our consciousness feels very real to us. So to say that consciousness is not real is a bit like the first time I heard magenta was not real. You know, it was a bit like a what? But it's because of the perception. It's the way you're experiencing it. Just because you're experiencing it doesn't mean that it is real. And I think that's something that can be hard to separate as well, like, because you can have these experiences like seeing the color magenta that are that's just so real, you know, but until you take it back and you break it down, and I think magenta's a really good one to explain this with, because it is so simple. It's just the fact that there are two real light waves that give you these distinct experiences of color inside you, and then when they cross, they happen to give you a different experience, and that experience is completely generated by your eyes and mind and things like that. And it's something that wouldn't be, it can't be detected in the same way that the light waves could be detected with instruments themselves.
So is the dress black and blue, or is it white and gold?
Yes.
Or is it magenta?
It's on the floor if you're lucky.
Do you think that there's any benefit for people to actually understand, especially in day-to-day life, the differences between things that are really real and things that are collective fictions?
Say that again, sorry.
So do you think there's any benefit to people in the everyday for people understanding the difference of the things that are really real and the things that are collective fictions? So if we go back to the collective fictions, things like the sun setting and money and justice and borders and things like that.
Astrology.
Versus things that are really real, like, you know, the rocks or the land, or, you know, so on and so forth.
Are there any benefits to knowing the difference between real and fiction?
Well,
is that what you're saying?
Collective fiction. So collective fiction is something that is obviously an agreed one that has a certain use, and it does us well to act in a lot of cases as if they are real. For example, borders. If you get to a border and you go, borders don't really exist, mate, and you try and get through with right? So it makes sense for you to act as if those things are real. But then that might lead people to thinking all of these collective fictions are really real. The sun does rise and set. This border is a real physical thing there, and so on and so forth. Do you think that these collective fictions, there's more benefit for that people thinking that they're real, or that the understanding that it's pragmatic to act as if they're real with the knowledge that they're not really real?
I think it's probably better for them to understand that these are shared fictions and useful fictions than if they're real, because at least if they understand that these are collective fictions and pragmatic things and useful fictions, they can be changed and discussed.
I suppose that helps with conversations, especially when it comes around to things like law or if people wanted to change borders and things like that. What about you two? Do you have anything to add?
I don't. How do it in English? Wait.
Grottendom.
Yeah. No. I think that it's useful for people to be able to know what the difference is between between these things, but at the same time, it doesn't really matter as long as they're not change it. Because if you're just seeking to live your life, I'd say just go for what you experience and just declare that as real and go from there, right? That's really what you do when you want to live your life. If it changes these things, then yeah, it would help to know that they're not real and not necessarily necessary.
So you think for most situations, there's no real reason for people to actually know that collective fictions aren't real. But if they want to see change in certain things, if they that's when they should have the knowledge.
Yeah.
And what about you, Andy? Oh, sorry, Dave. Did you want to contest that?
No. I was just going to say, think of something like morality. If we understand that morality is, say, a useful fiction, and these are simply rules that we sort of agree on and that there are ideas that we share, when certain ideas of morality are taken to be incontestable and unchangeable, it can cause a lot of problems, like stoning of adulterers or, lashing homosexuals or chucking them off a building. Understanding that these things are fictions rather than things that exist out there is probably more useful than thinking that they're real and out there and they have to be obeyed.
Makes sense. And for you, Andy?
Even if they are
Oh,
real,
sorry. Yeah,
even if they are real, it would probably be better to see them as useful fictions.
So some things that are actually real are better seen as fictions anyway. And you, Andy?
Yeah, I think it's definitely beneficial to understand what is real and what is collectional fiction. And I mean, it's kind of just echoing what Dave's just said, that as a society there are certain rules in place for it to continue to progress or move. I think progress is probably the wrong word, but to continue going. But know that some of these rules, they can be questioned, and because they're not real, they're just, it's just another framework in which the society is living, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Bible says you can collectively reach conclusions. You can't change the real things. Realizing what you can't and can change is a good thing. So, I mean, that's another way that I suppose is a good way to look at things. You couldn't change. Well, I suppose there are certain real things you can change as well. If you really don't like a rock, you could smash it and make it a pebble. But that really isn't in the spirit of what this conversation is about. That's just me being silly. Sorry. But yes,
I mean, you could always commit a coup.
Sorry.
Coup.
You could always commit a coup.
Yes.
I mean, January 6th, that motherfucker.
They took our election.
But yeah, I think that there is a lot of benefit. I mean, for me, sometimes have trouble adjusting to the notion of things that I thought were definitely real actually aren't, and the other way round. Things that I thought were actually a fiction actually are real. Usually goes the other way round. Usually it's things that you realize are just a fiction, a social construct, or whatever. And those but I think it's also beneficial in realizing that, okay, well, if this is literally something that people have made up, it's far less important than the things that actually are. Off Computer Set has a question. Is the mind real? Go on, Dave.
The mind is real according to the mind.
Yeah, depends on what you mean by real.
So we've been discussing real and reality a lot today, and there's different ways that you can take a look at this, and exactly how you're using the mind there as well. Are you using it in the brain sense and all of the processes that are going on, or are you talking about it in the sense of the pictures and things that flash up inside you?
You can alter the mind by altering the chemicals, but you can't put the mind under a microscope.
No. The closest they've done to that is they've tried hooking you up, and they've been doing these really vague sort of scans of trying to take pictures of what you're thinking in your mind. And
yeah, but that's still taking the processes rather than an actual mind as an object.
Exactly. You're not having the experience there. So they've clarified and saying the experience of mind. So is the experience of mind. I mean, it's something that feels real to you, but again, I don't know if you could say it's real in the same way that you could say like a rock is real.
Yeah, I think the experience is real, but it's not something that you can touch. It's happening in real time.
Yeah, it's a very different reality. It's the wrong word for it, but context to discuss.
Yeah.
The thing in. So yes, but not in the same way that some other things are considered as real. Sorry for a vague.
No causal efficacy in a mind.
Sorry?
No causal efficacy in a mind.
Well, no, I mean, it's the processes around it that cause it, isn't it? It's not...
The mind is caused, it isn't a causer.
Yeah. So if we go back to one of the things that we were saying, for in general, when something is considered real, it has causal efficacy, then that is something that is real. But then I was actually just having a thought about this, Dave. There has to be maybe an endpoint to the causal chain. I mean, I know causes will probably go on, but say if you get to the endpoint of a causal chain, the last thing has no causal efficacy, but it was caused by everything before it. That doesn't mean the last thing in the chain is not real necessarily, does it?
Well, if it has been caused to do something, then it has to be real because it has been impacted by causal efficacy.
Yeah. So something can be. So if something has causal efficacy, it's definitely real. But something caused by causal efficacy, but that has no necessary.
If it's being impacted by something with causal efficacy, it has to be real because otherwise the thing couldn't have causal efficacy on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's a subsequent question of where is it localized to be called real? And I think it's a product of the brain. I don't think there's a specific point that you can point to. I don't know if you're still around, Luke, or if you're going to catch the rest of this later, but I don't think there's a single point in the brain where you can say That's where the mind is. It's a product. It's of parts.
This is why somebody like Dennett calls it a Cartesian theater. There is no mind as such. There is just a bunch of processes that create experiences.
Yeah, there you go. So it is not localized as such. It is just all the processes that go into making it. The closest to a localization, a single localization you could have is in the brain. It is
the first person experience.
Yeah. If the brain is damaged, you could not have a mind, or a very different mind, or if these neural connections are affected so much, you could end up without a mind or with a very different mind. And the brain might be able to keep the rest of your body running, but you don't have the experience of having a mind, of being alive. There is no failure. Does that help answer the question? I hope it does. I don't have a better answer than that.
Consciousness is a huge mystery, because
Yes.
it's something that we don't have access to apart from through things like folk psychology.
And where's Luke when you need him? Cool. Dave, was there anything else, reality and real-wise, that you think that we should probably bring up?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, and Martijn, did we cover off all the things that you wanted to bring up for tonight?
I think we did, yeah.
Yeah, we've got all of that secured.
Well, unless you want to spend the next 5 hours debating AI with me.
I don't think anybody wants that.
Not even AI.
Yeah, I tell you what, Martijn, you should do that.
AI at my job actually stops fucking talking to me when I'm right and it's wrong. I really hate it. That's a dick move.
I would love to see a conversation with you and ChatGPT. In fact, maybe we should do that at some point. We get the voice version of it on, and you actually have an argument of all the things that you begrudge AI for, and we'll get that on there.
Well, we can do that. Yeah, sure.
You could get AI to write an article of the reasons why AI is not good.
We've done that. We've actually done that.
Really?
Kristen did
enough.
it. So Kristen got AI to write an article of the issues with AI and in the future. And at the end of it, she put, just so you know, this is an AI generated article, blah, blah, blah.
Brilliant.
But so many people flamed it for what it was just by reading the title. I mean,
well, yeah, that of course.
And it was
that
just,
you see any title, and that's what people react to.
Yeah, and it was just the general response of it was funny, because, I mean, we've all got. I think there are some people that are definitely way on the bandwagon. There's definitely some people who are too far off the bandwagon. I can see there's pluses and minuses and dangers and all sorts, and it needs to be used responsibly. But watching the people have meltdowns over an article written by AI about the dangers of AI,
unless those responses are AI responses.
I think they were too poorly written to be AI.
They will be soon enough, my friends.
Well, I'm sure AI can simulate, dumb people.
Off Computer says, does AI have a mind? To that, I'd say no, because mind has a certain experiential quality to it. So it doesn't have a mind in the way we have a mind. Yes, thank you, Dave. It doesn't have the first person experience. So no is the quick answer to that one, and you can go into all the sorts of nuances if you like. But
does a calculator have a mind? I mean,
yeah, at the moment it's basically the same as that. We might reach a point where an AI brain is created in such a way that it resembles a human brain and it starts having experiences. But at the moment, it doesn't actually experience anything; it just processes. Cool.
I mean, technically speaking, if determinism is true, it's just processes for us too.
Yeah, well, especially if it's hard determinism, yeah.
Yeah, everything's just a reaction. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just that we happen to be along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. We think we have choice and control, but no, this is just a reaction.
Because the illusion of choice was better for survival and ended up producing better societies, and therefore there was more survival of the gene. So, oh no, I don't want to become a hard determinist. I can see it happening quite easily because I've convinced myself of it sometimes and go, no, I don't like it. Yes. Cool. Well, I don't think there's anything else that we really need to cover tonight. Unless, Andy, was there anything else you thought that you'd like to bring up?
Nah, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, next week we're going to be doing our horror movies, remakes and reboots and all of that sort of stuff. So hopefully all of you will be there. I know Kristen is going to be there, but might be late. And Dave, horror movies are a passion of yours. Yes, Bible, as if
I think it goes. Doesn't it go horror movies and then philosophy? Like horror movies is at the top for Dave.
Horror movies, masturbation, philosophy.
Wicked.
All at the same time.
There we go.
Hopefully.
Why do you think Dave has his mic there? He puts himself on mute. There's a reason.
It's going to be an interesting stream next week.
Oh yes,
stream.
Lots of ectoplasm.
Stream of what, you may ask?
Certainly not consciousness.
But we will be looking at different concepts within the whole framework of everything. We'll be looking at like the reboots versus the remakes, and all sorts of different types of horror movies. There's going to be some that I know some of us won't necessarily have seen. I'm going to tell you now that I'm probably not going to get the chance to prepare any little clips like I had originally intended to. But I think the discussion around the movies, the changes, the benefits, one of the main things I want to address is some of the Asian cinema versions versus like the watered down US versions. But I don't want to spoil too much of the show because otherwise, why we come back? Hang on. There's another message that's just come in. How can you have a guest to speak and hide behind a hoodie? Then you have to pull the full sentences from your guest. How can I trust this? I don't really know what you're saying there. Are you complaining that Martin has his hood up?
Don't worry, the hood's not real. It's not real. It doesn't matter.
He's a Jedi. That's all that matters.
No, he had a nap before we started, and he didn't have time to do his hair. So.
No, yeah, I'm sorry if I've misunderstood you. I didn't really get what you were saying. Martin is more than just a guest, though. Martin has been with us since the start of Answers in Reason, so you can read plenty of his work on answersinreason.com, and then he's not just a guest. Does that answer your question? Again, I'm not really seeing anything coming back from you, so I don't know what you're trying to say. I do apologize. There's probably a delay between what you're trying to say. I'm sure that there's a very salient point in there somewhere. But on that note, we're gonna shoot off. We'll hope you be back next week to see the horror movies stream. It's gonna be horror movie remakes and reboots. You've been watching the Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
Hi, Martijn.
And I'm Andy.
Niall.
Good night.
Do, 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 do.